क्रेडिट नोट भनेको के हो र डेबिट नोट भनेको के हो चाहिँ आज हामी डिस्कस गर्दैछौँ है त। सुरुमा क्रेडिट नोट भनेको के हो त भन्दाखेरि क्रेडिट नोट, अ क्रेडिट नोट अल्सो नोन एज अ क्रेडिट मेमो or credit memorandum is a document issued by a seller to a buyer indicating that the seller is crediting the buyer's account for a certain amount. This credit note is typically issued in situations where goods or services are returned. If a customer returns goods to the seller, if a customer return goods to the seller, or if there is an overpayment for service rendered, the seller issue a credit note to reflect the amount to be credited back to the buyer's account. Second, errors in billing. If there are errors in the original invoice, such as overcharging or incorrect billing amounts, a credit note is issued to correct the mistake and adjust the amount owed by the buyer. Third point, discounts or allowances. Sometimes a seller may offer discounts or allowances to a buyer after the initial sale has been made. In such case, a credit note is issued to reflect the reduction in the amount owned by the buyer. Now, debit note. A debit note is a document issued by a seller to a buyer indicating that the buyer owes additional money to the seller. It's essentially the opposite of credit note. Debit note are typically used in the situations such as billing for additional goods or services. If the seller provides additional goods or services to the buyer beyond what was initially agreed upon. If the seller provides additional goods or services to buyer beyond what was initially agreed upon, a debit note is issued. A debit note is issued to request payment for the extra item. Debit note is issued to request payment for the extra item for the buyer. Correcting undercharges. If the seller realizes that they undercharged the buyer in the original invoice, a debit note is issued to collect the additional amount owed. Third one, adjustment for damages or penalties. If there are damages to goods or penalties incurred by the buyer, if there are damages to goods or penalties incurred by the buyer, the seller may issue a debit note to collect the corresponding cost. Let us see example of debit note. Imagine you own a bookstore and you sell books to a customer. You originally invoiced them for rupees 10,000. Later, you realize you forget to include the cost of shipping, which is rupees 1000. So you send them a debit note for rupees 1000 to let them know they owe that extra amount for shipping. It's like saying, hey, we forgot to charge you for shipping. Please pay us this extra 1000. Thank you so much.